We've got our modes function block and our modes STL still open. Let's just get rid of those. And I'm going to want my main, so let's pull that. And aside from the main, I'm also going to want to pull up a graph, and we don't have a graph yet, so let's add a new block. And this is going to be our sequence. So I'll just call it sequence. That is a function block for certain, and it's going to be graph. Hit OK, and it's going to crunch and think a little bit, and there we go. We're going to do this thing so easy. So let's come down here. We've already got one step in transition. We need 1, 2, come on, there we go, 3, 4 more of these. Because our fault mode, I don't think we're going to incorporate that in here. We're going to try to handle that externally. So we've got this much, and let's go ahead and jump into step 1. And first thing is we need to set a bit while this thing is active. So we're going to set as long as step is active. And what are we setting? That's going to be warm-up mode. Got it? And we didn't name this step yet either, so let's call that warm-up. Real simple. And we're going to set warm-up for the warm-up mode bit for as long as this thing is active, and we're going to transition out of here when we see our warm-up transition bit. That was super simple. Let's go to step 2, and this is going to be our stabilize. And while this thing is running, we're going to want to energize our stabilize mode. And we're going to transition out of here when we see our stabilized transition. Man, I'm breezing through this, aren't I? I know you feel robbed at this point, right? Sneaky. Now we're looking for, this is going to be our generation step. And set as long as this step is active, generation mode. And transition out when we see generation transition. Next step, cooldown. Qualify, set as long as this step is active. Cooldown mode, transition out when we get the cooldown transition. Last but not least is idle. And we're going to set idle mode. And now we're going to transition out here when we see not idle transition, but we're looking for our start sequence bit. And that start sequence bit is going to transition us out of here. But now let's go back to our main view. We're not going to an end. Instead, we can do this one of two ways. We can either end this or we can leave it as a cycle. So that just depends on how we want to handle it. And I think we could just as easily handle this as a cycle. So from here, I'm going to put an alternate route, and that's going to be this jump, and I'm going to jump to warm up. All right, so I've got two ways to get into warm up. When I first start, I actually want to be in idle, and so this step 5, I need to rename that. That needs to be idle. And let's go back into our main view. So whenever we turn our system on, we want it to be in idle mode. And right now our first step is warm up. So let's do this. Let's take all of this right here and let's just move all of this down to the bottom, okay? So now idle is actually on the top, and let's renumber these things going down. So this step 5, I'm just going to rename that 52 for the time being, because that's going to free us up down here. That I can call that step 5. Then I can call this step 4. I can call this step 3, this step 2, and this will now be step 1. Okay, that makes more sense. So now when we first start, we're going to come into idle mode, and this transition is going to happen when when we see the start sequence bit. And that start sequence bit is going to be energized once we actually hit the system start push button. And minimizing that, we're going to go into cooldown, and then on our cooldown transition, here we want a jump. So from here we're going to jump to idle. So let's click on that and bring a jump in here and go back to idle. And let's open idle. We're going to stay in idle until we get the start sequence. And generation, we remember that we're handling that in the modes, but when someone hits the system stop button, that's what's going to transition us into cooldown mode. So yeah, I think we've got this thing set up. When we first start this, we're going to be into idle mode, and a fault mode, I think we'll just de-energize. Depending on how we handle fault mode, different alarms might just kick us out of this whole sequence altogether and force us to restart the sequence. So let's start thinking about that right now while we come into main, and we've got all of this logic to control our different modes. But now we also need, and I wonder why those modes are red. That's kind of weird, but I guess we'll figure that out whenever we run this, if it's giving us errors. But let's hover over that and see what it says. This data block is not up to date. Oh, we don't care about that. Okay, that's fine. So I'm going to add one more network in under here. So let's insert a network, and this guy is going to handle our sequence. So let's bring our sequence in, and now if this sequence gets de-energized for any reason, we just need a way that we can turn this back on. So let's go ahead and bring a bit in here for this init sequence. And I'm going to bring an assignment over here on my output, and this is going to be sequence running, so we can track to see if that guy is running. Let's define that, and we'll go ahead and make that a global bool. And what I want to do is I want to find out if that guy, if the sequence is not running, I want to do something. So let's go ahead and put another rung here, and I'm just going to copy my sequence, and on this rung I want to look for something else, so I'm just going to move some things around here. Bear with me. And good. Okay, I've got it like that. I want to look for someone to push the system start push button while the sequence is not running, and if they do that, then I want to one-shot. So let's bring in a one-shot and give it, actually I can give this an ONS storage bit, and I don't think I'm using 4 anywhere in here right now. I've got ONS 1, 2, and 3, but I don't have that 4. And if somebody pushes this, and this actually needs to go right up here to init. I want to have an init sequence, and I will put the assignment to that right here, copy and paste that in, and I just need to one-shot that under those circumstances, and it'll kick this sequence back on forever. And let's define that, and that can be a local temp bool. Okay, and my mindset at this point is that when we go into fault mode, it's not going to kick us out of sequence. It's just going to override some details while the thing's running. It might change us into a different mode or something like that. So we're going to have to go through those alarms step by step and fill in the details of those. I'm going to go ahead and separate that out for the next lecture. So I'm going to add one more lecture before we debug all of this stuff. And